"Sir, you're under arrest for trespassing on your own property." That's what the cop almost said before I showed him my deed. See, this Karen had been terrorizing our entire lake community for months, calling the police on anyone who dared to exist without her permission. She threatened to sue me for $50,000, filed false police reports, and even tried bribing county officials to get me thrown off my own land. Here's the kicker. She had no idea I owned the $800,000 mansion she was renting. Picture dawn breaking over Lake Serenity, the smell of pine needles mixing with morning mist, when suddenly, blue police lights start strobing across my grandfather's old cabin. Gravel crunches under tires as two squad cars pull up. And there she is, Brenda Carmichael, standing on her mansion's deck in a bright pink bathrobe, pointing at me like I'm some criminal mastermind. What would you do if someone called the cops on you for fishing on your own property? Let me know below. Where are you watching from? I bet half of you have your own HOA horror stories. My name's Marcus, and 3 years ago, I thought I'd found paradise. After 20 years in military logistics and a divorce that felt like getting run over by a tank driven by my ex-wife's lawyer, I inherited my grandfather's cabin on Lake Serenity, Minnesota. Population 3,200, where the biggest drama used to be Mrs. Henderson's cat stealing fish from the neighbor's docks. The cabin's nothing fancy. A 1960s A-frame sitting on 2 acres of pure heaven. Every morning, I'd wake to loons calling across mirror-still water. Step onto dockboards worn smooth as glass by 40 years of Minnesota weather and breathe in air so clean it made my lungs forget about 20 years of Army diesel fumes. The place smelled like my childhood old cedar mixed with pine needles and that sweet metallic scent of lake water at dawn. For 2 perfect years, Lake Serenity earned its name. 47 properties scattered around 8 miles of shoreline, mix of blue-collar locals and summer folks, all following one sacred rule. Wave when you see each other, help when someone's in trouble, and mind your own damn business the rest of the time. Then Hurricane Brenda hit. She bought the biggest eyesore on the lake, an $800,000 McMansion that looked like someone had dropped a suburban Dallas house into the Minnesota woods by accident. Within her first week, she'd introduced herself to half the lake by pontoon boat, always wearing those blindingly white capris and cardigans bright enough to signal aircraft. Sweet as artificial sweetener on the surface, but her eyes cold as January lake ice. The morning, everything changed. I was sitting on my dock with coffee that tasted like liquid peace when I heard the low rumble of an overpowered pontoon boat cutting through the morning calm like a chainsaw through silk. Yoo-hoo. Hello there, neighbor. Brenda's voice carried across the water with all the warmth of a tax audit. She pulled up to my dock wearing a smile that would have made a used car salesman proud. I'm Brenda Carmichael from the executive estate across the way. Executive estate? Jesus. I'm here on official HOA business, she announced, producing a manila folder with the theatrical flair of a game show host revealing prizes. The Lake Serenity Homeowners Association has voted on updated aesthetic standards, and I'm afraid your rustic setup isn't meeting our community guidelines. I set my coffee mug down so hard it rang against the wooden rail like a bell. What homeowners association? Her plastic smile cracked just enough to show teeth. The one that protects our property values from declining influences. That aluminum boat has got to go. And frankly, the fishing gear scattered around makes the whole area look like a bait shop exploded. My declining influence was a 1995 L that had caught more fish than her fancy floating living room ever would. The scattered fishing gear was my grandfather's hand-carved rod holders and a tackle box older than she was. Lady, this property has been in my family since before you were born. There's no HOA covenant on my deed, and there sure as hell won't be. The mask slipped completely. Her voice dropped to Arctic temperatures. We'll see about that, won't we, soldier boy? She gunned that pontoon engine like she was fleeing a crime scene, sending a wake that slammed into my dock hard enough to spill my coffee. The smell of burning gas and expensive perfume lingered in the morning air like a threat. As I watched her mansion's windows glinting in the sunrise like a predator's eyes, that old military instinct kicked in. This wasn't just some neighbor dispute. This was war. 3 days later, I found an envelope taped to my front door like a parking ticket from hell. Inside was the most elaborate piece of fiction I'd seen since my ex-wife's divorce settlement demands. Lake Serenity Homeowners Association violation notice blazed across expensive letterhead in blood-red letters. Apparently, I owed them $500 for failure to maintain dock aesthetic standards and had 30 days to comply or face additional fines and potential property liens. The document looked impressive: official seals, case numbers, even legal-sounding language that would make most people panic and write a check. Too bad it was worth less than the paper it was printed on, but most folks wouldn't know that. Time for some reconnaissance. The Cedar Falls courthouse basement smelled like old leather and broken dreams, where dust motes danced in fluorescent light like tiny ghosts of bureaucratic nightmares past. I'd learned during my Army days that the best intelligence always comes from the people who've been filing papers longer than you've been breathing. So, I made friends with Dolores, the 70-something county clerk. "Another HOA victim, hun?" she whispered, pulling out my property file with hands that shook slightly from arthritis. "That Carmichael woman's been in here 6 times this month asking about enforcement procedures and lien authority. Between you and me, honey, she doesn't know her ass from her elbow about property law." My deed was crystal clear. No covenants, no restrictions, no HOA authority whatsoever. But here's where my old logistics training kicked in. Always check what the enemy is really doing while they're distracting you with paperwork theater. Brenda's Lake Serenity Homeowners Association existed all right, incorporated 18 months ago, with exactly 12 members out of 47 lake properties. In legal terms, they had about as much authority over my property as my neighbor's cat. But while cross-referencing ownership records, something made my detector start screaming. Several lakefront properties had recently transferred to Carmichael Holdings, LLC. A quick online search revealed the truth. Our self-appointed HOA queen was running an unlicensed vacation rental empire, turning quiet family cabins into party houses for Twin Cities tourists. The woman lecturing me about community standards was the one actually destroying them. I remembered something my grandfather used to say: "Before you fight City Hall, make sure you know who actually runs the city." Smart man. He'd also taught me that most county records are public information: property ownership, business licenses, covenant restrictions, all searchable online for free. Amazing what you can learn when you actually do your homework instead of just threatening people. Armed with this intelligence, I decided to test community sentiment with some strategic social media reconnaissance. Facebook might be where brain cells go to die, but it's also where you discover who's really paying attention in your neighborhood. My post was simple. Has anyone else received violation notices from the Lake Serenity HOA? Asking for educational purposes. My phone exploded like a fireworks factory. 8 different lake residents sent private messages, each with their own Brenda horror story. She'd been systematically working around the lake like some kind of legal intimidation tornado, threatening elderly widows over bird feeders and young families over mailbox colors. Janet, a retired librarian with organizational skills that would make the CIA weep with envy, had been documenting everything in a 3-ring binder. Tom from the marina shared photos of Brenda's bounce checks and unpaid fuel bills. Even 90-year-old Florence chimed in with observations about unusual late-night activity at Brenda's supposed family rentals. I created a private group chat called Lake Serenity Truth Squad, because if you're going to fight crazy, you might as well lean into the comic book drama. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Brenda's voice oozed through the speaker like honey mixed with industrial solvent. "Marcus, sweetie, I saw your adorable little Facebook post. You're making this unnecessarily difficult for yourself. Just asking questions, Brenda. Neighborly curiosity. Oh, honey, you really don't want to go down this road with me." Her voice dropped to that special tone women use when they're about to destroy your credit rating. "I have connections you couldn't imagine, and I will absolutely report you to the appropriate authorities for harassment and cyberbullying." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what kind of connections a vacation rental scammer thought she had with local law enforcement. If Brenda thought Facebook drama would scare me off, she clearly hadn't done her homework on military veterans. We don't retreat. We adapt, improvise, and occasionally overthink everything until 3 a.m. while planning 17 different battle strategies. Tuesday morning brought a surprise visitor. Tom Hendris from County Code Enforcement, looking about as enthusiastic as a man facing a root canal. His pickup truck crunched across my gravel driveway at exactly 9 a.m. because apparently Brenda believed in punctuality when filing bogus complaints. Mr. Marcus, sorry to bother you, but I've got to follow up on some reports about dock violations in an abandoned vehicle. Tom looked embarrassed, which told me everything I needed to know about the quality of Brenda's accusations. I poured him coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the battery acid they serve at government offices, and we walked down to examine my supposedly criminal dock setup. Tom measured everything twice, checked his clipboard, then shook his head like a man who'd wasted his morning on nonsense. Between you and me, he said, lowering his voice even though we were alone. This is the 23rd complaint I've gotten from the same address in 6 months. Lady's got the county office on speed dial. That's when Tom let slip something interesting. Brenda had actually tried to slip him a $100 bill during their last encounter, claiming it was a consulting fee for finding creative interpretations of building codes. The woman wasn't just playing neighborhood dictator. She was testing the waters for small-time corruption. The sabotage started subtly. My security cameras caught something that made my military paranoia look like casual concern. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck matching her handyman's vehicle crept past my dock, like a suburban ninja mission gone wrong. Wednesday morning brought a surprise that would have ruined my day if I hadn't learned to expect the worst. My fishing boat was sitting half submerged at the dock. The drain plug had been removed with surgical precision. $2,800 in water damage to the motor and electronics, plus tackle gear that had been in my family longer than Brenda had been alive. But here's where Brenda's desperation revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how evidence works in the 21st century. My security cameras had captured everything in glorious high-definition detail, complete with audio of her handyman muttering about crazy lady jobs while he worked. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez arrived within an hour, took one look at the video evidence, and shook his head like a man watching taxpayer money circle the drain. This crossed a line, Rodriguez said, examining the deliberately removed drain plug. Property damage is a felony if it exceeds $1,000, and your electronics alone put this in serious criminal territory. Arthur Peton had been my grandfather's lawyer since Carter was president, and at 78, he still dressed like he was arguing cases before the Supreme Court. His office smelled like old leather and expensive cigars. Marcus, you might want to sit down for this, Arthur said, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses. I've been reviewing your grandfather's estate more carefully, and there's something we missed. He spread documents across his mahogany desk like a poker player, revealing a royal flush. Property deeds, trust agreements, incorporation papers, all bearing signatures, and dates I'd never seen before. When your grandfather died, you inherited more than just the cabin, Arthur continued. In 1987, he created the Northwoods Property Trust as a tax shelter. You now own 60% controlling interest in a trust that holds for lakefront properties. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. For properties, including the $800,000 mansion currently occupied by one Brenda Carmichael. The words hit me like a slap with a wet fish. I'd been fighting my own tenant without knowing it. For 3 years, Brenda had been paying rent to a property management company that deposited her payments into an account I never knew existed. The woman who'd been terrorizing me about property standards was literally putting money in my pocket every month. Arthur pulled out a lease agreement thick enough to stop bullets. Your grandfather was thorough. This lease includes clauses about peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties, prohibition of unlicensed business activities, and maintaining community harmony. Ms. Carmichael has violated approximately 14 different terms. The irony was so perfect, it felt like divine intervention. Brenda had been harassing her own landlord while falling behind on rent payments, operating illegal businesses in violation of her lease. How behind is she on rent? I asked. 2 months with late fees accumulating. The property management company was actually preparing eviction proceedings, but they needed trust approval. That's you, by the way. I stared at the documents, my mind racing through 3 years of deposited payments I'd attributed to some mysterious inheritance account. Arthur, she doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she? His weathered face cracked into a smile. Not unless she's considerably smarter than her recent behavior suggests. What happened next proved that desperate people make spectacularly stupid decisions, especially when they're cornered like rabid raccoons in designer cardigans. County Commissioner Bill Hayes had been serving Cedar Falls for 12 years without a single ethics complaint. According to Bill's later testimony, She strutted into his office Tuesday morning carrying a designer purse and the kind of confidence that comes from huffing your own supply of entitlement. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a proposition that could benefit both of us," Brenda had announced, sliding an envelope across his desk like she was buying state secrets. $5,000 cash for consulting services regarding the environmental hazard that was Marcus's property. Bill Hayes had been in politics long enough to recognize corruption. He'd immediately reported the attempted bribery to the district attorney's office. She made similar approaches to the zoning inspector and even attempted to bribe a sheriff's deputy. The zoning inspector actually wore a wire during their second meeting. The recording was so clear, you could hear Brenda's jewelry jingling as she counted out bills while explaining how Marcus, the dangerous veteran, needed to be relocated for community safety. When Arthur called with news about the DA's investigation, his voice carried satisfaction. "Marcus, she's facing potential prison time. Bribery of public officials is a felony. If you've never seen 300 small-town residents pack into a high school gymnasium for what was supposed to be a routine town council meeting, you're missing out on democracy's greatest spectator sport." Local businesses had closed early so owners could attend what everyone was calling the Great Lakes Showdown. Brenda arrived fashionably late with her expensive Twin Cities lawyer, a slick L-looking guy in a $1,000 suit. She dressed for battle in a white Powers suit, while her nervous energy suggested she knew the walls were closing in. I approached the podium feeling calmer than I had in months, carrying a manila folder that contained enough documentation to sink a battleship. The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. "Thank you all for coming tonight. 3 months ago, I thought I was dealing with a simple neighbor dispute. Tonight, I'd like to share what I've actually discovered." Property ownership documents projected onto the gymnasium's pull-down screen in letters large enough to read from the parking lot. The audience gasped in unison when the truth became clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Brenda Carmichael's landlord for the past 3 years without knowing it." The gymnasium erupted like a stadium after a game-winning touchdown. Security camera footage of the boat's sabotage drew actual boos from the audience, while audio recordings of bribery attempts made the county attorney sit up straighter. Florence, sitting in the front row, shouted, "Good faith, my ass," loud enough to make the pastor cover his ears. "Miss Carmichael, I offered you respect as a neighbor and reasonable discussion as a community member. You chose intimidation, harassment, and criminal behavior instead. I held up the official eviction notice. As your landlord, I'm giving you 30 days notice to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have been handled privately and respectfully." The standing ovation lasted so long, I thought the fire marshal might issue noise violations. Brenda vanished from Lake Serenity faster than a bad check bounces, packing her designer luggage into a U-Haul headed for Florida within 14 days. The criminal case wrapped up with small-town efficiency. Brenda accepted a plea deal for probation and 200 hours of community service. The Lake Serenity Advisory Committee evolved from our Truth Squad naturally, establishing reasonable community standards without the fascist tendencies that plague traditional HOAs. The real magic happened when I discovered how to invest 3 years of surprise rental income. The Lake Serenity Community Scholarship Fund started with a revolutionary concept: reward local kids who understood community service. Janet and I started dating around Christmas, bonding over shared appreciation for proper documentation. I rediscovered my grandfather's woodworking shop, building picnic tables for public lake access areas. 3 battle-tested lessons every homeowner needs. First, research deed restrictions before buying property. Second, public record searches reveal anyone's liens, judgments, and business licenses through county websites for free. Third, security cameras and documentation defeat harassment better than any lawyer. This morning, watching sunrise paint Lake Serenity golden while loons call across peaceful water, I hear grandfather's wisdom echoing across time. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everybody. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments below. Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where ordinary people refuse to let neighborhood tyrants destroy their peace.